Thank you. I hope everybody is okay this afternoon.
Outstanding.
Outstanding. Excellent. Always feel happy to see all of you.
Perfect.
That's great. That's great. All those good news. So today I have a great pleasure to have my good friend, Mr. Nozzi. He is senior planner for the city of Gainesville. To get him, I have to really go through several bosses, because he's in high demand and his time is very precious. So I have to request the bosses to allow him to come and talk to our class. Okay, make sure that you talk about, ask him question about comprehensive planning, because he's part of the comprehensive planning division. I have to read, his credentials are great. I've heard him before, I enjoy his presentation, and I know that he is the author of a book on urbanism, and et cetera, but let me just read it. This one just came to my attention, he brought it up. Mr. Nozzi, AICP, has a bachelor degree in environmental science from SUNY at Plattsburgh and a master's in planning from Florida State University. He has been senior planner for the city of Gainesville since 1986, long time I know him, and was briefly the growth rate control planner for Boulder County. He has authored several environmental, transportation, and urban design plans and regulations for Gainesville. He is a member of the Congress for New Urbanism and Who's Who for the South and Southwest. His most recent book is The Road to Ruin, an introduction to sprawl and how to cure it, published by Prager Publisher. So what I'm trying to say is that I believe that in front of my own eyes he grew. And he is a great planner, and that's what I am proud of him very much, because I have witnessed him long time. And to be very honest with you, when I step by step watched him, and it's unbelievable that he put the urbanism in his heart and mind and went after it, and to the point that he has to become expert, and also to the point that he thought of, like you must have heard about Duani, people like Duani, these are big shots. But his philosophy has been matured, and I believe in his thought process about new urbanism. So, not to take too much of his time, I think he has a lot to say. Make sure to ask questions. Please make sure to ask questions. He's a great planner, and challenge him with the questions. But he's ready to answer all those. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well, it's going to be difficult for me to live up to that introduction, very flattering introduction. A couple of years ago, when I prepared the city of Gainesville's long-range transportation, land use, and urban design plans, I would give presentations around the community, and people would say after the presentation, oftentimes they'd say, you should write a book about your speech, what you're saying in your speech. And so eventually I agreed, yes, I will write my first book. And this book, Road to Ruin, is the result of that decision. What I'm going to do today is quickly summarize for you the concepts I describe in the book. So without further ado, there's a lot of ground to cover, so I'll just jump right into it. First, and most importantly, it's very important to know that transportation comes first. Transportation determines land use. Okay, and we decide our transportation plans, when we lay out our roads, we decide how we're going to get around, we're fundamentally deciding how we will lay out our land uses, whether we'll have sprawl, whether we'll be compact. In fact, it also fundamentally determines our quality of life. So transportation comes first. It's very important to know that, because oftentimes you'll have traffic engineers say, well, it's not our fault that we have to widen this road. We're widening the road because the land uses are requiring that we do so. Well, that's almost always nonsense. It's almost always the case that transportation comes first and the sprawl and the strip commercial follows it. Okay, very important to know that. Now, I'll give you one example of how transportation will shape the character of a community. First, when you design a street for 20-mile-an-hour design speed, a pretty modest, slow design speed, you get a certain character of street corridor. You'll get a fairly good, healthy flow of pedestrians. It's a safe, comfortable place to be for pedestrians. You tend to have a lot of good streetscaping and a lot of ornamentation in buildings, because the public realm, the sidewalks, the streets, the enclosed spaces, feels really good. and it's actually makes sense because the cars are traveling slowly and they're traveling in a well-behaved manner, okay? So you get a certain character with a 20-mile-an-hour design speed. When you go to a faster design speed, what starts happening is that the field of vision starts shrinking, okay, for the motorist, all right? The field of vision gets smaller and smaller as the car goes faster and faster. So what happens incrementally is that you start losing the building details, okay, and you start losing pedestrians. Now this becomes a less pleasant place to be, and in fact you even have buildings that turn their back to the street because the street's just a hostile corridor now. This is more of a drive-through than a drive-to. Okay, at higher speeds you have a drive-through cellscape versus a drive-to place to be, where you've got rich transportation choices and a lot of building ornamentation and buildings addressing the street with their entrances. Okay, you lose a lot of that incrementally as you go to higher and higher speeds. Ultimately, at the higher speeds, you get this kind of a feature. Okay, you start seeing retailers screaming at the motorists, the potential customers, saying, come and shop at our place. And so that means bigger and bigger signs, bigger and glaring lights. You're trying to capture the attention of motorists flying by it, and you have a couple of seconds to capture the attention of the motorist. Okay? So you incrementally get this kind of thing. No force on earth can stop this high-speed corridor from becoming strip commercial development. Okay? When you put Walter Kulash, a famous transportation engineer in Orlando, Florida, talks about the 50-50 road. When you design a road for 50 miles an hour, plus or minus, or 50,000 cars per day, plus or minus, you inevitably get, over time, strip commercial development. No force on earth can stop that road from marching towards strip commercial development if you design the 50-50 road. So again, transportation determining land use, okay? I was very surprised to learn a number of years ago that about 100 years ago, we looked upon developers as gods. They were much admired by the community. People really admired developers. They were the heroes of the community. It was a spectacular thing for me to realize it. I had no idea. Well, of course, since that time, almost the reverse, almost 180-degree turn in terms of how we look upon developers. Developers are now perhaps the most despised profession in America today, right? There's nothing we perhaps hate more than developers today. And so what's happening is that we have what I call a NIMBY epidemic, not in my backyard, a growing number of people screaming and yelling, saying, you will not develop in our community anywhere near me, you're not going to develop because I oppose you no matter what. An epidemic of NIMBYism, and by that I mean that we have a growth in the terminology where we refer to describe these NIMBYs, okay? There's a growing number of terms we use because there are so many of them. There's such a growth in the number of them. We have NIM2s, we have caves, we have bananas, we have notes, and my own personal favorite, nopes, okay? Not on planet Earth, all right? Now, the obvious question is, why was there such a radical shift, from extreme hero worship to extreme fear and anger and opposition? What on earth caused that radical shift? In my opinion, the shift is described by considering this. Before roughly World War II, this was our design imperative, okay? We designed to make people happy before World War II and for centuries before that. Human civilization, the primary focus was designing to make people happy. Since that time, this is our design imperative. We designed to make cars happy. Okay? Since World War II, largely, this is our primary focus, making cars happy. All right? I believe that's the fundamental explanation as to why we have a NIMBY epidemic in America today. Now, there's an important dilemma here. Okay? When we create a community that's designed to make cars happy, we end up having a large number of citizens that start thinking and seeing like motorists and not like people. Okay, they're thinking to themselves, how is this new development going to be for my Ford or GM? They're not thinking how is this going to be for Amy or Bobby. They're thinking more about how it's going to be for their car. Okay, that's the primary focus. We're thinking about how it will be for our car when we look at the new development. Well, a big problem is that it's a zero-sum game. Almost always a zero-sum game. You can't have a win-win situation with cars being happy. Almost always when you make cars happier, you're going to reduce the quality of life for people, okay? And that's largely because there are clashing values. People and cars have clashing values. They mix like oil and water, okay? They don't mix well at all. Cars like big roads, big parking lots, high speeds, okay? People are much more pleasant, much more happy and secure and safe when they have more modest spacing, building spacing, street widths, slower speed travel. People are much happier in those conditions. So there's clashing values, okay? So what we have is this terrible reality, a terrible dilemma, where we have a growing army of people that are saying, hey, we're going to be cheering for cars. We're going to be fighting as hard as we can to make cars happy. We're going to go to our city hall and demand our elected officials make conditions better for cars. Well, the unintentional consequence, in my opinion, is that we become our own worst enemy, okay? Because the car habitat and the people habitat are clashing habitats. They have different objectives. So we end up arguing for things that lower our own quality of life. Perhaps they increase the quality of life for our cars in the near term, but overall, the quality of life for people is going down, and largely we are our own worst enemies by arguing for our cars in a lot of our public meetings. Now, it's important to know that in this scenario, where we start trying to make cars happy, that's our imperative, we end up in a situation where motorists come first and business people come second. Motorists come first and environmentalists come second, okay? The needs of our car come before economic business needs and environmental needs. You know, I know a lot of friends of mine who are environmentalists, but when push comes to shove, they will say that their car comes first and the environment comes second. We have this imperative of making cars happy, so everything comes after the car. This is a traditional street scene that we have largely abandoned over the past 50 or 60 years, okay? Designing a street for transportation choices. You know, it's possible to walk, use transit, bicycle, walk, and use the car. You know, this is not about getting rid of the car, okay? The traditional scene is a scene of transportation choices. Everyone can share the space, okay? And look at this. You've got a lot of ornamentation and building details. The buildings face the street with their entrances, and they form what's called an outdoor room. By pulling the building facade up to the street side sidewalk, it forms a sense of enclosure. And humans find the sense of enclosure formed by the building walls, the building facades, to be a very comfortable, secure feeling. This is very enjoyable space, the enclosed space formed traditionally by buildings pulled up to the street. Okay? This is what we have descended to. The same street scene, this is what we've got. Now we're designing to make, the design imperative is to make cars happy, remember? Okay? We're making only cars happy here. Probably no pedestrians are ever going to walk here because it's so unpleasant to be here. You feel exposed, you feel unsafe. You know, high-speed car traffic, cars are probably really happy here. The buildings, though, look at the buildings. Buildings start pulling back and start turning away from the street because the street's so hostile and unpleasant. So the buildings pull back. You lose building orientation. This becomes a place of misery for the pedestrian, the bicyclist, and the transit user. And it's, in fact, you know, only a high-speed drive-through corridor for cars. It's not even a pleasant place for motorists as well because, you know, driving down this is much less pleasant than driving down this unless your only objective is to get through it at high speeds. You know, if that's your only objective in life, driving at high speeds, this can be okay, at least in the near term when you don't get congestion. This is going to be more pleasant over the long term, even in a car, okay? So we are so focused on improving the car habitat, what inevitably happens is that we start seeing a decline in people habitat, the clashing values, the oil and water, they don't mix. Also what happens is that indirectly, well, directly we see a decline in wildlife habitat when we make cars happy because we build big high-speed roads, we get a lot of increase in road kills. Okay, so there's a direct impact on wildlife. The indirect impact on wildlife is that when you see a decline in people habitat from the improved car habitat, You see people starting to flee from your cities because now the city is only fun for cars, unpleasant for people, so people start fleeing to the suburban sprawl locations. That means that the really good wildlife habitat that surrounds your community is being steamrolled by suburban sprawl subdivisions. Okay? So indirectly, you have huge wildlife habitat impacts from making cars happy. This is not an image of a German city just after being bombed in World War II. This is a recent image of downtown Houston, Texas. Okay? Great place to be and live if you're a car, right? Look at all the surface parking here. Well, guess what? How many people are going to want to live in this kind of a setting? This is a great place to be a car, but who wants to live here? You know, everybody, I'm sure everybody's fleeing from Houston saying, I'm not living here. This is misery. And so, of course, Houston's steamrolling their wildlife habitat because they've got this happy car habitat in the city. I made my first trip to Europe recently, and as some of you may know, in Europe, the insides of homes, the insides of cars is pretty modest by our standards. Okay, it's pretty modest inside homes and cars and stores and offices in Europe. Okay, really kind of modest. Well, when you go to America, you look at American homes, it's pure luxury. You know, it's like a palace. It's tremendous luxury. People are living like kings in America. Even the lower income people live in places that are just stupendous on a world standard. Okay, we have fabulous, fabulous insides. The private realm in America is just stupendous. The insides of homes and cars is just incredibly luxurious.
Come on, like I'm English. It's like a squatter's house.
Well, it's extreme. I mean, not the average American is like that.
Right.
That's like Hill Plantation, and that's like, you know.
Right. I'm exaggerating to make a point. Now, what I discovered, I was in Paris for a couple days, and what I discovered is that in Paris, the public realm, the streets, the sidewalks, you know, the public realm was just stupendous in Europe. Paris, this is a main commercial street in Paris, okay? Just stupendous public realm quality of life. Every single day when I walked out into Paris's main streets downtown, I felt like I was walking into a party. People were happy and smiling, sociable, a very pleasant place to be. It was really an upper to walk out in the streets in Europe because everyone was visibly enjoying themselves, really enjoying being in this high quality public realm. You know, building ornamentation, enclosing the street, a very pleasant place to be. Every single day it seemed like a party. A great, great public realm in Europe. In America, again, the contrast is striking. You know, the opposite in America. The public realm in America often looks like this. This is anywhere USA. You know, any city in America, we could spot places like this, right? Total misery. The public realm is being abandoned, is being neglected. We're running away from it because it's becoming really unsafe and unpleasant. You know, no one wants to be in this kind of a place except a car going at high speeds, right? So a real striking contrast between private realm and public realm, America versus Europe. And what that tells me is this. In Europe, they've essentially said, we are going to achieve our quality of life by improving the public realm. In America, we're saying, no, our quality of life comes from making the private realm wonderful. So the Europeans are saying, we provide an equal opportunity quality of life. No matter who you are, what class you are, what race, what your income level is, you can enjoy quality of life in Europe. And in America, if you're not wealthy, you're not going to have much of a quality of life because your quality of life in America largely comes from the insides of your homes and cars. The public realm in America is being degraded and abandoned.
It's a wonder why everyone's knocking our doors down to get in America.
They don't know what they're leaving. This is an example of a traditional residential design. Okay? This happens to be my house, by the way. What you see in the traditional residential design is you have a public sidewalk at a conversational distance to the front porch. A front porch is very common in the traditional house design. Okay? Conversational distance, a modest distance between the front porch and the public sidewalk. So when people walk by, there's someone on the sidewalk, there can be a conversation between these people. They can interact as neighbors. Okay? There's energy being given to the public realm by the house, and the public realm is giving energy back to the house. The house is facing and addressing the public realm in the traditional design. Okay? And not only that, but you've got citizen surveillance. people walking along the sidewalk can perhaps notice a problem with the house and report it. Or conversely, people in the house looking outside a window, let's say, can notice problems that might be happening out in the public realm and report that. So you have citizen surveillance in the traditional residential design. This is what we have descended to over the past 50 years. You know, it's all about the car, okay? Of course, everyone here knows what this house style is. This is known as the snout house, okay? The garage protruding out from the front facade of the house is a snout. And so you have a very prominent garage that says a car lives here. You know, the people in the back are kind of like accessories. You know, who's important here? The car. The car is important in this house design. When archaeologists look back upon the ruins of the American Empire in the future, it will not be difficult for them to know what was important to Americans, okay? The car is what it's all about here. Of course, public realm is abandoned and not really even used. There's probably not even a sidewalk here. You know, the house is turning its back to the public realm. You know, I'm not even sure where the front door is here, okay? The place where the people live is an accessory dwelling unit in the backyard.
That's especially true out as you go west, where everything's built around a car and big superhighways.
Right.
Southern California.
Right.
No property, big garages, and no room to live in your house.
So what happens is that as we start turning inward and avoiding the public realm by avoiding streets and sidewalks, we end up starting to live vicarious lives. We have vicarious friendships because now we're really not interacting with our neighbors. We're staying inside our homes and inside our cars, our cocoons, essentially. We're abandoning a sense of community and abandoning developing a friendship network. So we end up with vicarious lives and vicarious friends through this television, okay? And growing number of Americans are finding life satisfaction by this kind of a scene here. Now, a lot of people say, well, you know, motorists pay their own way through gas taxes. There's been studies done in the 1990s that show that really that's not even close to being true. $174 billion subsidy we provide for driving a car in America every single year. And this was done in the 1990s, so this number I'm sure is much larger today. Huge, huge subsidy that begs people to drive a car pretty much everywhere. It's irrational not to drive a car everywhere in America because of this huge subsidy. And this huge subsidy, for those of you who have taken some economics, the huge subsidy distorts the market. We have really distorted market signals with huge subsidies that say we will have people engage in more travel by car than they would engage in normally because of the big subsidy. The price signals are saying you should drive a car everywhere. We're begging people to drive a car everywhere. So without this huge annual subsidy, we'd see a big drop in car use, a big drop in desire to use a car because it would become more expensive and less convenient. So you would see a much smaller amount of driving by car or travel by car if you eliminate this big subsidy.
How do you handle that in areas like, I was out in San Diego for a while, and you can't afford to live close to downtown San Diego. I would love to be able to get on, like they have a little red train line, but it only goes out about 10 miles.
Right.
And circles around that little inner part of the city. But you have to live 20, 30 miles out and get on that fast-speed 12-lane highway.
Two big reasons for that. One is that there's a very small and vanishing number of residences where you can have a walkable, car-free lifestyle. A much shrunk, vanishing kind of opportunity for that kind of housing. Therefore, the price goes to the roof because there's a lot of people that want it, but there's very little market product provided for it. So the price goes way up. The other thing is that as people start seeing the negative effects of congestion and the sterility of living in suburbia, a lot more people are starting to want to live the more exciting, walkable downtown lifestyle. That means more people are wanting to move downtown. Again, prices go up as a result of that. The solution is in part that we need to make the walkable lifestyle more legal again. It's largely illegal to build a walkable mixed-use lifestyle in America. So we need to make it legal again. We need to provide more of that product so that when you increase the amount of product, you will see a decline in prices due to competition. Another important concept is value of trips. Okay, very crucial for us to know that there's a difference in the value of car trips. Okay, at this end here, these are relatively high value car trips, emergency trips to the hospital. Very high value car trips. Okay, at the other end, you have relatively low value car trips. You know, the recreational rides, the joy rides, the impulse driving, going off to rent a videotape. These are relatively low value car trips. Okay, important to know that trips have a value difference. All right, a difference in value is in terms of the types of trips. But guess what? In America for several decades now, we have made the very irrational decision that all car trips are equally high value. Okay, they're equally, all of them are up here. So what we're doing is we're spending trillions and trillions of public tax dollars to make sure that Bobby can drive across town at rush hour to rent a videotape. And that is economically suicidal, and it's going to ruin us because we just cannot sustain the kind of irrational economics we're engaged in with what we're doing with our roads. We're assuming that all trips are high value, and it's killing us financially, if not otherwise. You know, all levels of government, state, local, and federal, are killing themselves thinking that assuming that all trips are equally high value. Now, a guy by the name of Anthony Downs from the Brookings Institution has described he describes why it's theoretical, even in theory, even if we had infinite numbers of dollars, we cannot build our way out of congestion. You cannot widen the roads enough to avoid congestion, even in theory, even if you have infinite dollars. And his theory is known as the triple convergence. Three things inevitably happen when you widen a road, in this case from 2 lanes to 3, trying to avoid congestion. Three things inevitably happen, the triple convergence. First, what you get inevitably is you have people converging back on rush hour. Some people are saying, I'm not going to put up with the rush hour, so I'm going to drive at a different time of day. When you widen the road, those people converge back on rush hour driving because now the road is less congested. Secondly, and inevitably, people start converging on car travel. Some people with the congestion were saying, I'm not going to drive a car anymore because it's too congested. I use the bus, so I'm going to walk. Okay, but with the widening, now it's more pleasant to drive a car, so people converge back on car travel. The people are avoiding the car travel earlier. Thirdly, and inevitably again, people converge on the route. Some people said, I'm not going to put up with the congestion in this route at rush hour, so I'm going to avoid the route. I'm going to take a different route. When you widen the road, people converge back. So these three things happen. Research shows that within 5 or so years, the level of congestion you had before the widening returns and becomes, in many cases, even worse than you had before you widen. So we spend billions of public dollars to create congestion that's even worse than it was originally. Again, we're our own worst enemies, and it's really not possible to escape the triple convergence. One thing, too, that this creates is a self-fulfilling prophecy. We widen roads, we say to ourselves, you know, we widen roads and then almost overnight the road gets congested again. We say, my God, it's a good thing we widen fast, otherwise we'd have 24-hour gridlock. You know, it's a good thing. Well, what we didn't realize, or what we often don't say, is that, you know, if we hadn't widened the road, we would not have created all those new car trips that were converging back. Okay? So what happens is the widened road creates new car trips that would have not happened had we not widened the road. So we're, again, our own worst enemies. We have a self-fulfilling prophecy where our action results in new car trips that would not have occurred had we not widened. We're inducing car trips, new car trips. So we have a 2-lane congested road. The obvious conventional solution is that we widen to 4 lanes. And what do we get? We get a congested 4-lane road. Okay, the triple convergence says we can't avoid congestion by widening. We go to 6 lanes. And what do we get? We get congested 6 lanes. So when we widen roads, we're not really saying to ourselves, okay, we can escape congestion by widening the road. Let's go ahead and decide that. Well, all we're really deciding is what flavor of congestion do we like? Do we want 2-lane, 4-lane, or 6-lane congestion? That's all we're deciding. Okay, we're not deciding to escape congestion we widen. We're only deciding how big the streets will be that are going to be congested in our communities.
I kind of have to.
How about 10 lanes?
I'm not getting it with that partially because I understand what you're saying, but yeah, stick to that picture for a second. you got to look at why we're widening the lanes, because there's congestion. But why is there congestion? Mainly because those outreaching suburban neighborhoods keep popping up and growing. So more people are living out. You have to accommodate that higher density of traffic flow.
That's a
So
fair
if you don't
point.
build any more lanes, how do you get those people from point A to point B?
Well, what
Because it
happens
will
is
add to
that,
the congestion without adding trips.
right, what happens is there's a delay.
I mean, if you don't increase the population, you're in a constrained housing market, let's say.
I'm actually going to go into that point in
Okay.
a few slides.
I
But
will
you know, a big thing
stand
that's
by.
happening is that there's a delayed response time. Okay, for some people decide to move out in Sprawlsville, not realizing what congestion they're going to face over the next 10, 20 years or whatever. And so incrementally over the long term, what happens is that a lot of people say, I'm not going to live way out there, I'm going to move in closer. So part of the congestion you see after you widen or after you have population growth is due to the fact that you haven't had enough time to have the people respond back to the equilibrium they're going to eventually get to. So, for example, the big cities like New York City, San Francisco, they see a real big demand for residential housing in the downtown area, and not much demand for suburban sprawl in those places. In fact, traffic congestion is a very powerful means of minimizing suburban sprawl, because congestion, well, I'll get into that later, but congestion really affects your travel time, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes.
And also, there is something about this point. This is very interesting. In other words, if we have to have statistical facts to back this, you know, human psychology is such that they hear that, okay, they're going to 6-lane, let's go to suburban.
Right,
Okay?
'cause now they could
Let's go
handle
to
it.
suburban because that's a good place. You have your
Right.
private home and a garden and everything. So maybe that, I don't have study to tell you all. I don't know whether you have any study to back this.
Right.
But this could be a kind of correlation if we study and research.
Right. The 6-lane, the widening enables the more remote locations where people are going to be living. Okay. Widening roads enables this kind of a lifestyle. And again, this transportation drives the land use. Okay. Transportation comes first. It's not the suburban sprawl, then the road widening. The road widening will create the suburban sprawl over the long term.
That's true.
When you build wide roads in your community, you will lock yourself into a suburban sprawl future.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's a good point.
Well, you know, even 10 lanes. How about 10 lanes? Do 10 lanes allow us to escape congestion? Apparently not.
That's San Diego rush hour right there.
This is, my guess is
6
Atlanta.
lanes on each side of the road. Backed up.
My guess is this is Atlanta. There's a lot of highways in Atlanta that look like this, but it could be anywhere USA.
Anywhere,
Anywhere USA, right?
yeah. LA, DC.
LA is as bad as it is.
That's Gainesville.
It's very important.
That's Gainesville,
Very important to know that congestion regulates itself. Congestion regulates itself. Okay? What happens when people face congestion, some people say, I'm not going to put up with it. They have a certain level of tolerance. So what happens is the triple convergence I mentioned earlier starts working in reverse. People start avoiding the route, start avoiding rush hour, they start avoiding travel by car. So congestion regulates itself. It does not get infinitely worse if we don't widen. Okay? That's what we think. But if we let congestion regulate itself, we can avoid the huge expense of widening roads. The widening of the road short circuits the self-regulation process. Okay? We've got to be very careful. You know, it's not that we avoid widening, we'll get 24/7 congestion on the road. It's not going to be getting increasingly worse because people start regulating themselves. Some people won't put up with it. Another key term to be really on guard for, transportation engineers love to say that if we don't widen this road or don't widen this intersection with turn lanes, we'll have a failed road or a failed intersection. You know, that sounds like terrible, horrible, people are going to die left and right. You know, babies and children and senior citizens, people will die. Failed road, it sounds horrendous. Well, what they're not saying is that, you know, failed road is an inflammatory term. Failed road simply means that you're going to have more delay, a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes more delay. That's what a failed road or failed intersection means. It's not that people will die, but failed road sounds like people will die. So we're going to be very often saying, we'll do whatever you want because we have to avoid that catastrophe. We can't have a failed road. So be very careful of that term. It's often used. This is the most, if you remember one thing in my presentation, say this is the one thing I want you to remember. The average travel time to and from work or to school, or whatever you do on a daily basis, is 1.1 hours on average. Some people do more, some people do less. Okay, but on average, you have 1.1 hour travel time back and forth. This has been true across time and cross-culturally. So for example, even the Aborigines, when they went out hunting mastodon, several centuries ago, they had this travel time, 1.1 hours for hunting mastodon. So apparently we as a species have a hardwired desire to have this be our average travel time. So let's look at what that means in terms of implications. You have a two-lane community. A community is mostly a two-lane road network. You have a certain geographic size. You go to 4 lanes, again, you're not escaping congestion by building 4-lane roads in your community. All you're going to get is you're going to get a bigger geographic size for your community. Because now what's happening is that 1.1 hours is now expanding. Now you can live further away and still do a 1.1 hour travel commute, right? 6 lanes, same deal. Don't escape congestion, you just get a bigger community when you build bigger roads. Because the 1.1 hours is just getting further and further out. The equilibrium. Conversely, as we slow down the car through more modestly sized roads, travel speeds that are slower, you're going to shrink your 1.1 hour equilibrium point so that your community gets smaller and smaller. Okay? There's another way of looking at this, travel distance theory. We know that on average a person will tend to walk a quarter mile to a mile in distance on a regular basis. A person that's bicycling or using the bus or transit tends to be willing to travel regularly about 3 miles. Okay? If you're in a car, it's up to 10 miles. You're regularly willing to travel about 10 miles per day by car. Okay? All right. This next slide is a big one, so it's going to be a while to come up. All right. Let's look at Gainesville's urbanization history to see if some of this is played out in the real world. Okay? Gainesville's urbanization. This is what Gainesville urbanization looked like up to about the year 1930. Okay? As we'd expect, about a 1 mile radius from downtown is the size of the city. 1930, when we're largely still a walking community. 1960, we have this kind of an urbanization pattern of Gainesville. Okay, now we're moving more into the bus and bicycle form of travel. Okay? By 1990, about now, this is what urbanization looks like in Gainesville area, at least conceptually. Okay? Now we're 7 miles out from the downtown core. Okay? We're moving toward the car-based travel society. Now, we had a 7-fold increase in population from 1930 to 1990. 7-fold increase in population, a pretty dramatic increase in population for this community. 7-fold is huge on a national basis, if not statewide. Well, look at this. 23-fold increase in land consumption over that same period. 23-fold increase in land consumption. Okay? So, let's look at what we can expect in the future. If we maintain the status quo of big, high-speed arterial roads in the western urban area of Gainesville, I don't have to look into a crystal ball to predict with certainty what Gainesville's urbanization future will be. I can tell you with certainty that Gainesville will eventually urbanize out 10 miles from downtown, the car-based community, out to here. With certainty, I can predict that. If we talk about Oaks Mall being the centroid of the city, as many people do, because now a lot of jobs are here, a lot of retail is here, then we run 10 miles out from Oaks Mall. We're pretty much engulfing Newberry, okay? Inevitably, if we maintain the status quo of making cars happy with big, high-speed arterials in our western urban area. Now, I can argue that you can quantify objectively whether sprawl occurs in your community by looking at these two numbers, looking at these two rates. If your land consumption increase exceeds your population increase, we could perhaps say that quantitatively or objectively we're experiencing suburban sprawl. So you look at the difference between these two rates, land consumption is higher than population growth, you could perhaps say that you're a sprawling community objectively. Okay, a lot of people say, well, you know, I know it when I see it, pornography. You could perhaps quantitatively describe sprawl when you see those rate differences. Another thing that happens when we develop the car happy big roads, big high-speed roads city, we start losing a sense of community. A lot of these social condensers, the places where we get together to have a sense of community, a lot of them start bleeding out to the periphery of the urban area. Okay, all these social condensers for Gainesville have moved to the periphery from former downtown locations. So we lose a sense of community when we create the car habitat. Okay? Now, this was Gainesville's original post office, the downtown Hippodrome. Gainesville's original post office built about 1910, I believe. A very impressive building.
Beautiful.
Very impressive. Look at the ornamentation, the big columns. This is clearly a building designed by a community that's proud of itself, saying we have real respect for our civic institutions. This is the 1990 version of the main post office for Gainesville. Look at this. What's happening here? We are now saying, because we're a car culture, we're inside our cars, inside our homes, we're cocooning ourselves, we're escaping the public realm, we're abandoning the public realm. Now, ornamentation and prideful buildings are an expendable extravagance. They're going away. We're losing this because now the public realm is almost irrelevant. So we start building these totally forgettable buildings.
Exactly. It costs a lot less to add that into a grocery store than it does to build a
So let's look at this. Location. Location of the important civic buildings. The main post office, originally in Gainesville in 1910, was built in a very prominent vista terminating location. Okay? This says, I'm important, come visit me. You know, I terminate this vista. I'm a very important high visibility location. We have pride in our community, we have a sense of community. I'm going to be located at the termination of a vista of a street. Well, the new one, look at this. Look at the location of the new one on Southwest 34th Street. It's somewhere in there, I think. Okay? No vista termination in a throwaway location, a low visibility throwaway location in a community that apparently doesn't have pride in itself anymore, or says that our civic institutions are important. We put our important post office civic institution in a throwaway location, and we're not really providing any ornamentation either, and we're losing a sense of community or essential social condenser that we could have had in the downtown by putting it way out in this remote location in Southwest 34th Street. Now let's look at Alachua County's population growth. 44% population growth from 1980 to 2000. Pretty rapid growth. Look at this. 89% growth in cars for that same period of time. Okay? 89% compared to 44% growth in people. So in the number of humans we've had in the county as of just recently was about 220,000 people in this county in 2000. Well, guess what? There are now more cars than people in this county, okay, because of this growth rate here. More cars than people, and when I say more cars than people, I'm including in this people number, I'm including seniors and children that don't drive cars. There are more cars than all people in Alachua County. And this is happening throughout the nation. You know, I have a degree in environmental science, so I know how important population growth is as a problem, but I will tell you that suburban sprawl and traffic congestion are largely driven by our focus on cars and our dependency on cars, not so much focused on, you know, population growth. We're consuming a lot more land because we're car-based per capita.
Yeah, but really, that's about right. I mean, if you think half of that population,
You know, hold on. This is important because they complain really that The audience told me that they cannot hear without without this. Make sure to pass this.
It's just that seems about right, because you figure half of that population is probably, drivers that are of age, okay? Population, half of that is of age, able to drive. The common household has 2 cars because the man and the woman both want to drive. So, I mean, I think that's probably about right. I mean, why wouldn't that be right?
Well,
Just about every family has 2 cars.
I don't think anyone's claiming it's not correct. I think it's just a disturbing, it's a disturbing statistic.
Yeah, and you have the kids too, and they should.
This is everyone. This includes people that don't drive, seniors and children.
That's true. Yeah, it's way enormous.
Okay, well.
But anyway, the per capita difference is a very disturbing fact because it shows extreme car dependency. It shows we're really a suburban sprawl kind of community. We have a lot more cars than people. We're even similar numbers. Well, is this true just in Gainesville, or is this true throughout the nation? Let's look at the national figures. Look at the nation from 74 to 84, 38% population growth from 74 to 84 in the nation. 80% increase in land consumption nationally in that same period. Look at this down here. LA and St. Louis, 45 and 35% population growth. Look at the land consumption growth in those 2 cities. Huge difference. Huge difference. And look at this. Cleveland's declining in population, but they still have an increase in land consumption for that period. So again, population growth is not the primary cause of suburban sprawl. Okay? It's an important issue, but it's not the primary cause of sprawl, because you can sprawl even without population growth, because we consume more land per capita because we get around by car. So what happens is we have a treadmill. The triple convergence happens inevitably when we widen roads to try to escape congestion. In the medium run, what happens is that households are forced to start buying more cars because now they can't get around, they find it more difficult to get around by means other than cars. So more cars have to be bought per household to survive in your society. In the long run, what happens is that citizens start fleeing to those remote suburban sprawl locations, because now those in-town locations are becoming car happy and people unhappy, so they flee in the long run. Ultimately, what happens is that you start getting growth in the car cheerleaders. The citizens are saying, hey, we're trapped out here. We have to get around by cars, so we have to have big roads. We have a growth in car cheerleaders. And so you get a growth in the number of people screaming and yelling at the elected officials. They're saying, let's widen the roads. We're trapped. We're congested. So you get back in the treadmill. You have cities like, places like South Florida and Southern California. They've been on this treadmill for a long time now, and it's very, very difficult to escape it once you're in the treadmill. It just cycles. It's a vicious cycle when you have this kind of process occurring. Let me pass by this because I think we're running out of time. Right?
We have 2 minutes.
Yeah. Let me pass this by.
We can continue. Let me just see if we can a little bit more continue. If it's okay with you guys.
Did you drive in today?
Did I drive here? No, I rode a bicycle. I have never come to this campus in a car. We can.
Except that I want to make sure that these guys are not tired. Are you all not tired or anything?
No, please don't.
Okay. All right. Let's look at.
If you want to go.
Let's look at 3 hypothetical boyhood friends in this neighborhood. All right. This is now the suburban car-dependent neighborhood design. Okay. Three boys living in a neighborhood, living 150 feet from each other as the crow flies. Okay. Well, guess what? If Billy wants to go see his friend Bobby, he probably can't walk this short little distance here because there's probably security fences here, barbed wire, no trespassing signs. Because we're so concerned about the public realm is becoming so hostile and unsafe, we're trying to secure ourselves. There's probably even alligator crocodile moats around the house. Big problems trying to get from here to here. So Billy's gonna have to do this. Okay? This 150 feet becomes a half mile. Okay? Now, if he wants to go see his friend Jeff, it's even worse. because now he's probably facing the same barriers, seeing his friend Jeff, so he's got to do this number. Okay? High speed, unsafe, arterial streets. Now it becomes 1.5 miles instead of 150 feet. And so what happens is that, we have mommies and daddies becoming taxi drivers because kids lose their independence of travel. They can't get around. How many parents are going to let their kid do this thing? It's just too unsafe, too long a distance. So we're going to drive the kid to go see his friend Jeff. Jeff and Bobby probably aren't even going to be friends because there's so little chance for them to go see each other because they don't have access to a car. They don't have access to a car, so they can't visit each other as much as they'd like to. A study done in Southern California and small town Vermont, where it's possible to walk around in a small town of Vermont, they did a study. They found that in a small town of Vermont, kids were able to get around on their own about 3 times as much as the kids in Southern California, where it's really car dependent. They found the kids in Southern California watch 4 times as much television as the kids in Vermont. Okay, I'm not going to say that that's the direct correlation, that's a cause and effect, but it certainly suggests that, these kids are trapped in their homes and they're just watching TV more in Southern California than in places where they have independence of travel as kids. So the power of the connected grid. Destination, origin A, destination B. This is the cul-de-sac pattern. Okay, 1 trip choice from A to B. This is 2 trip choices from A to B. This is 3 trip choices. This is 6 trip choices from A to B in this kind of street pattern. Okay, 6 trip choices, route choices. If you have 10 roads by 10 roads connected on a connected grid, anyone here guess how many route choices you have from A to B? Any guesses? 100. Okay. That's a good guess. The number of route choices you have from A to B is 184,000. Okay? 184,000. That means that this is a very well ventilated street pattern. The traditional street pattern we've abandoned, the way we used to build cities, very well ventilated, very, very difficult to have congestion in this kind of a street pattern, because if this one route here is congested, you just select the other 183,999 route choices you have, right? Okay, so it's very difficult to congest the well-regulated, the well-ventilated connected street pattern. Not only that, it's a much better place for emergency vehicles, because if emergency vehicles like an ambulance faces a problem with a down power line or a traffic accident, they have different ways to get to the emergency. But with a cul-de-sac pattern that we have today, largely, there's only one route, to the emergency. So we've got real problems with emergency responders when we disconnect the streets as we had over the past several decades. All right, this is what 40 people look like bicycling and walking on a street. This is what 40 people look like when they're on a bus. This is what 40 people look like when they're in chairs. And this is 40 people in cars, okay? We're packed in like sardines. There are only 40 people here in this image. In other words, congestion when people are in cars, congestion comes very quickly. You don't need a lot of people to have gridlock, all right? Congestion comes very quickly because there's a lot of space taken up by each car. Much more space taken up by car than in a bicycle or when you're walking or even on the bus. Much less space taken up. So, of course, there's a lot of opposition to growth because people think this is going to come if we let growth happen or if we let density occur, right? But this shows that even with 40 people, you have congestion if everyone's in a car, all right? Because cars take up a lot of space. Dan Burton makes a good point about this. Cars are happiest when there are no other cars around, and people are happiest when there are other people around. Cars are a very antisocial mechanism. All right, we don't want to have other people around if they're in cars. It's great if they're on foot, if they're walking. We're sociable species. We like to socialize and be friendly with other people in our neighborhood, especially. But when we're in cars, we don't want other people around. We're antisocial when we get in our cars. So, will this be our future? Is this the future of our city? You know, the city where we just say our imperative is to make cars happy. You know, great place to be if you're a car. People are fleeing the misery of this because it's only a car-happy place. You know, are we going to have a habitat that's only okay for cars?
What's the alternative?
Are we going...
I'm sorry.
Probably best for you to finish.
Okay, go ahead.
And then we can go in. Are we going to have choices as to how we get around? You know, are we going to have, you know, a single choice, just drive a car is your only way to get around in this kind of a scenario, this kind of a future? Your only choice of travel is by car. Will we have a loss of environmental conservation because everyone is steamrolling the outlying ecosystems with the suburban sprawl because they're fleeing the misery of the city here? Will we have pride in the community? Will we have a loss of pride because we have this? A place that's great for cars and a place that's really unpleasant for people and a place we really can't be proud of as a city. Or will this be our future? You know, a future that's rich in transportation choice. You can get around by walking, you can get around by bicycle, and you can get around by bus. Or are you going to have a high quality human habitat, a place that you're going to have higher environmental conservation because you're not as likely to flee this than this. So there's less suburban sprawl in this kind of a design, traditional design. And are we going to have a future where we can have pride in our community? You know, are we going to be proud of our community with this? Or are we going to have a scenario like this where it's all about the car and there's no ability for us to be proud of our city? Thanks for your time.
Let's debate this thing, you know, because I think you guys want to really, I know that we have time on the CD, but it will be very valuable to hear from all of you. Let's start with Dan, and then keep moving.
Yeah, Dom, thank you. That was
But
excellent.
Keep this with you, because without this, don't
They can't
ask
hear.
questions.
Okay. Don't forget the mic.
Yes, Dan.
I think there are a lot of neighborhoods and areas going that way, especially like around here, Hale Plantation, Tioga, the University Corners you're building up here. But how do you, these big cities, how do you get back to building up the city where somebody like me that has almost 3 kids and I'm worried about school systems and safety, and I feel more comfortable living where if I have to drive a half hour, I'd rather do that to put my kids in a better school, in a safer community in suburbia, and I'll suffer the pain and drive the hour. How do you make it where people will pay the public dollars instead of billions of dollars in a road to get back to that 1950s environment where you were in the city and you could walk to school and you could walk to the park and the store and everything was right there?
One of the awful realities of making cars happy is it's very, very, very difficult to get back to the tradition. You almost lock yourself in almost permanently into a miserable future if you design to make cars happy with big roads and big parking lots. One of the interesting points that we often hear is that, you know, I want to live in the suburbs because it's safer for kids. There are studies that show that actually if you factor in road safety, it's actually much more unsafe to live in suburbia than to live in a downtown because the probability of being mugged or murdered or beat up by hoodlums is lower than the probability of getting in a car crash if you live in suburbia and drive a lot. So it's a question of what kind of danger do you want to experience, and the suburban lifestyle actually has a higher chance of injury or death because of car crash rates being so high.
So I guess it's not so much the risk of death or being
Take them with you.
that risk is one risk that you probably avoid being in the center business district area. But most of the inner city schools, when you hear the word inner city school, you picture, you're just like, God, I would never want to go to, you know.
Well,
Ward's wife worked in an inner city school.
Right.
And it's scary. So you have to improve the amenities or I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but improve the other.
Right, and there's a crucial strategy. there's a
You're
crucial.
making me nervous over here.
There's a crucial.
You know what I'm saying? There's
Yes,
like
I know
you got to
exactly
build
what you're
those
saying.
things
Right.
up to get people to
Right.
want to go back to that.
Absolutely, there's a crucial
That's all.
strategy.
I'm sorry.
There's a very effective strategy for achieving that kind of scenario you're describing, and that is you want to do what you can to increase the number of higher income people that live in your downtown area. And it's really difficult to do that oftentimes. In places like Gainesville, I've heard this expressed too, people say, we're not going to provide these higher income units in our downtown because it'll chase away poor people. You know, we're concerned about gentrification. And so we're not going to provide for high-income people who live downtown because it chases out poor people. If you want to be effective in reducing crime and safety problems for your downtown and provide the amenities you're describing, you want to have higher-income people in downtown because they will inevitably bring political pressure to bear on elected officials saying, we want these things, we want a better situation, and they have the political power because they're wealthy. So the effective way is to bring more wealthy people to those downtown locations. That's part of the strategy.
San Diego is improving that, by the way.
Right.
Building these high-rise condos right now. I mentioned earlier about Southern California and San Diego being a congestion and people want to live far away, but now I think back, last year they built 2 high-rise condominium, wealthy people type places to live right downtown that have access to this area called the Gas Lamp District. And there's train access there, and you see more people taking the train, bicycle into work, that kind of, especially there because the weather's so nice, you could be outside.
One of the terrible things is that if in fact the doomsday people are correct that we're going to see gasoline prices go through the roof in our lifetimes, which is pretty likely, a lot of the suburban locations are essentially white elephants. People will start abandoning those locations because you really can't survive in those locations anymore with gas prices being $20 a gallon. So I'm very concerned that we're going to see a lot of abandonment of suburban sprawl locations that can't be lived in except by car.
I got a question on this. Kind of gets to your theory of transportation, you know, as the first thing that the growth follows the transportation.
Right.
I don't know, like in places like Washington, D.C. or New York City, places that do have a considerable landmass, but they have or Atlanta even, with the metros and the subways and elevated trains and that type of thing. When you have those, it doesn't seem like it should spread out as far, but those cities are still really big. I don't know which came first, but does something like that public transportation help, or
It
does
helps
nothing stop?
tremendously. There's a lot of densification along the transit corridors by commercial and residential. A lot of demand for people to live close to those corridors because they really dislike the congestion coming back and forth all the time. So over time, that will help. But the transit improvements largely followed the big roads that were built in those cities, like New York City with Robert Moses, and some of the other cities at first had big highways that resulted in a lot of dispersal of the population. And then over time, the congestion resulted in political pressure coming to bear on elected officials saying, you must provide high quality transit because I can't put up with this anymore. So it's not a coincidence that the big congested cities have the best transit. It's not because they're smarter than other cities, it's because they just can't put up with the congestion anymore, so they demand something better, something else.
Are you just concerned about like inner city car usage, or is it just the general use of things?
I'm sorry, repeat that?
Like, are you just worried about inner city car use, or is it just like general car use in like day-to-day use? Like, if I drive, like, obviously you're talking about San Diego or central cities, but like, what about if I'm gonna go from like Tampa to Gainesville? Do you think I should be looking
I
for a
think
different
that
form of transportation?
City-to-city travel is much more acceptable socially if it's by car. I mean, if you're going to travel by car, it's more socially acceptable that it be city-to-city. Once you reach the city, then you have to change the context and you have to start thinking more about what's going to be compatible with residences and commercial. And that's why it's important that we have context-sensitive design. Once you're inside a city, you have to change the design of the streets so that it's not high speed, it's not big and wide. You've got to narrow it down and slow it down because now you have a different context. Okay, so it's important that we create regulations and designs that fit the different lifestyles and patterns of our region. You know, we have a downtown walkable, compact design structure. We want to also have a more car-dependent suburban lifestyle design structure, regulatory framework. We also want to have the rural framework and the framework between communities. Each of those needs to have its own set of regulations, its own set of design parameters. It's not one size fits all. That's a big problem for us, is that we assume that one size fits all. We try to shoehorn the same suburban car-dependent design everywhere, and it's resulting in a loss of lifestyle choices. Really, the only choice you have in America today is a suburban car-dependent lifestyle. All the other lifestyles are vanishing because we think that one size fits all. And it's really resulting in not only loss of transportation choice, but also lifestyle choice. So the key is to provide for choices so that we don't say everyone must live and travel the same way. Okay, that's what we're doing, what we've done for the past several decades.
For the sake of Gainesville, do you think that providing feasible other choices aside from car use?
Do I think it's feasible?
Do you think that providing in Gainesville feasible?
I think we're taking baby steps. We do pretty well with bicycle travel, bicycle facilities, but we have a long way to go because we have way too much road capacity and way too much free surface parking, way too much. And that means that there's really no incentive to travel except by car. If you want to travel by bike, bus, or walk in this community, you have to do so irrationally. It's rational to drive a car everywhere in Gainesville because there's so much free parking. And there's not much congestion compared to other cities. Hard to believe, but it's true.
You parking on campus?
I'm sorry?
Have you tried parking on campus?
I have never taken a car to campus. I've lived here since '86.
Might be a change of opinion.
Well, you know what? You know what? It's, you know, Gainesville's transit growth, the growth in bus riders in Gainesville has gone up higher than any other community in America since the mid-90s. It's not because you have students all of a sudden saw the light and said, hey, buses are a great thing. What happened is that the campus has severe restrictions on supply of parking, and the parking's priced. So that sends a very powerful signal to students and faculty that says it's going to be painful and costly for you to come here by car. So a lot of people say, I'm going to come by bus because it's easier. So it's not that they saw the light, it's that the conditions told them it made more sense, it was more rational to come by bus.
Because I started on the bus and got to the point where I was like, I've got to get a car. I went the other way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's just particularly.
So,
Yeah, like the buses were too full.
so you find parking on campus?
I have to.
Well, they need to improve the bus system.
I mean,
You guys have to
take it.
I got a motion.
Exactly, motorcycles are the way to go. Lots of parking.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say that the buses are good, but they need to improve it. They need more
Many more buses. Yeah.
more buses on each route so they come more frequently to help with that, and then it would even encourage more people. But I think they're doing okay
Well, it
here.
depends where you are.
And there is a huge, we talked to the RTS guy, I can't remember his name, last semester, and he was,
Jeff Logan.
Jeff Logan, yes, he came in and told us how they've increased in the number of people that take the public transit.
Need to go further out, 'cause they don't even
That's
go
true
back.
too.
I think the buses need to reach further out because they don't even go where I live. I'd have to drive my car in to catch a bus and then
Right.
find parking wherever the bus stop would be.
Right. Some people would argue against that because people say that if you extend the transit lines out further and further, you enable people to live further and further away. So some people
You
say,
have to increase the road sizes if you increase the public transportation, right? 'Cause
Right,
you got
well-
less congestion. You got 40 people in a bus rather than 40 cars.
you would need more, you're saying you need more road capacity if you don't extend the bus lines.
If you don't extend.
Right, right, I agree, but I guess the third option is that you don't extend the bus lines and you don't widen the roads. And that over the long term will result in people living closer to the community.
Right, because it fixes itself.
But then like people
But then you gotta
take
get
advantage.
you gotta get a handle on the real estate people that want to build out further and further because they know
Well-
it's cheaper, and
There's a market demand
There's
for
a market,
for the
that's right.
small housing.
that's right. That's the problem. Right along with what.
That, by the way, I should make a very important point here, the interesting point. It's no coincidence that when you see these citizen transportation boards in communities like Gainesville, it's no coincidence that almost always you have several realtors on those transportation boards because they know they have a vested interest in big roads. If they have big roads, they're going to sell a lot of real estate in suburbia. Okay? So that there's no coincidence that there's a lot of realtors on those boards.
Perfect world if we're all on the same page with the same plan. Yeah, right along with what you're saying, I went to Charlotte, North Carolina a few years ago. Beautiful city, a newer city. 5 o'clock comes around, it's a ghost town. Nobody lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. You drive 30 miles out and live in suburbia, and the entire city is closed down.
Right.
It's a shame.
Well, that's happening all
Beautiful
over the
new
country.
city, very clean. They could build up right there and have everybody right there. Instead, everybody lives out in the farmlands that they turn into housing.
That's happened all over this. That's happened all over the country, and it's actually we're actually reversing that. Cities are coming back. Cities are coming back around the country. There's a growth in residential development downtowns like Gainesville. So downtowns are increasingly not dead zones at night anymore. It's not a 9 to 5 city. It's more of a 24-hour city. When you have more residences downtown, you become more of a safe 24-hour city, a healthy city. The key is to be 24 hours instead of a 9 to 5 city.
Right. I agree with that. Do you think we need more specialist education? Because like maybe current public planners just don't have the adequate knowledge or intelligence or
Actually,
even education to do it.
I'm glad you raised that question. Actually, what's the biggest threat to cities is specialists. Specialization is killing cities because oftentimes you have traffic engineers who are specialized in knowing one thing very well. They know how to build a really high-quality road, but they don't know enough as generalists to know what pedestrians need or bicyclists need or what residences need or what businesses need. So they design the road, and their only objective, their only narrow specialized objective is to provide a high-speed corridor for cars. That's all they're thinking about.
So what do you suggest?
We need more generalists like we had in the past. In the past, we had more generalists in all of our professions. And so when people designed roads, they knew a lot about a lot of different things, or at least a little about a lot of different things. And therefore, they were aware of more issues they need to be concerned about when they built those things. Today, the specialists only care about their one specialty, and they build things that don't work except for their own little narrow interest.
Excellent.
Good job. In the presentation, you had said that, I guess, the new construction, urbanization, you have the roads closer to the road. How do you address the congestion that's going to occur from people stopping to let people out, or just double parking and, creating congestion that way?
I'm going to say something that's not going to make me win a popularity contest. In cities, traffic congestion is our friend. Okay, a huge number of benefits that traffic congestion gives us very effectively. So we in fact want people to be doing those things in streets downtown because it slows down cars, it makes cars travel more well-behaved, makes car travel safer as the cars slow down.
Have you lived in New York City?
New
York City will kill you if you stop on the side of the road.
The road rage is coming from the fact that over the past several decades we've been conditioned to expect to be able to drive at high speeds as motorists.
That's true.
Okay,
We want
so-
instantaneous results.
So when you have a community that hasn't had that history, you don't have as much road rage because there's not an expectation of always being able to drive fast. So the key problem for Americans is that we have an expectation we're going to be able to always drive fast, and if we have to slow down, we're going to be really ticked off. So when you want to build in traffic calming to slow down car speeds, you want to try to do it as community-wide as possible, not just in one location. Because if you do it in one location, you have expectations from all the motorists to drive fast. They come to the one place where it's calm, and they get really ticked off. But if it's community-wide, the expectations of speed go down community-wide, and so there's less rage. And people tend to be okay with driving at slower speeds because they expect it, and they know over time that it makes for a better community.
But then the question of delay. Question of delay is another issue. They say that do not delay, do not slow down the arterial speed because of cost of delay.
Right. The highest travel speed for cars that gives you the highest capacity in a road or street is about 30 miles an hour. Above 30 miles an hour, you reduce the road carrying capacity. So if you want to maximize the number of cars that can be on a road, you want the speed of the cars to be about 30 miles an hour.
Okay. We're done, sir.
You guys have no question? Make sure, this is a very, this is a special class. They're very expert in planning, okay?
I can tell.
They're really super, and I have enormous respect for them.
Great question.
Each one of them, believe me, has great brain. But this guy is also a good planner, but he doesn't really say a thing. How about you? How about you?
No question.
No question. No comment. Okay, well, it seems like they all liked your presentation, and I thank you very much. Thank you. I really appreciate it, because these are high-level class, so you're
I wish you could snap your finger and just be there. Just everybody's downtown.
Yeah.